Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Scott Newhouse. I am a certified financial planner. I hope you are doing as well as I am. I'm in a great mood. My LA Clippers, I've got a little polo on supporting them right now. They tied a basketball series with the Dallas Mavericks 2-2. I thought they were going to lose that game, choke that game away, but they tied it. And so I'm in a good mood. We have been a tortured franchise, so I hope we can pull this one out. I'm not sure. All of our best players are basically as old as I am, and I am not a spring chicken anymore, unfortunately. So we'll see what happens, and I'll keep you updated. But I know this is not a basketball channel, so let's talk finances. Let's talk investments. What I want to talk about today is one of the downsides of diversification. And we all have probably heard, do not put all of your eggs in one basket. If you've been researching investments for any period of time, you've probably heard that admonition. You've also maybe heard a quote that says, there is no free lunch except diversification. Now, that quote is attributed to a guy named Harry Markowitz, who came up with modern portfolio theory, and that basically is the idea that diversification is highly revered, that it is one of the best things that you can do with your investments, and it is a free lunch. You know, you can't get a free lunch because someone's got to pay for it eventually, but Harry says, no, there is a free lunch, and it's diversification because it is that powerful and it is that smart of a thing to do. But I want to share today why diversification can actually hurt you, and it might give you feelings of regret of, man, I wish I wasn't diversified because I would have done better had I not been diversified. So let's talk about that. And the reason why this is going to come into play is because even if we can cognitively know that we should be diversified, there's going to be an emotional element to us that's going to see the returns that we could have got when we weren't diversified and start feeling like we're missing out and that we made a mistake by being diversified. And for instance, last year, as well as the last 5 years, the last 10 years, have not made a really good case for diversification. In fact, if you've been diversified over the last decade, you have missed out on gains that you could have made had you not been diversified. So let me get into the specifics of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the outperformance, the great returns of large size companies here in the US, and relative underperformance of small size companies, medium sized companies, and international companies. So I'm going to pull up a chart for you listening on the podcast. Everyone on YouTube is going to see this. But last year in 2023, large size companies outperformed all other asset classes. And I think there's 12 on this list that I've got up on your screen. And they large size companies had an incredible 26.3% return, while medium sized companies had a 17% return. Still great, but it's definitely way less than 26. Small size companies had 16.9% returns last year, and international, well, there's international split up, but international large cap was at 18%, international small cap was at 13%. My point is, yes, all of the other asset classes, small, medium, international, they did very well, but they did not do as well as large size companies. And it doesn't just stop there in terms of, just 2023. Let's look at the last 10 years. The last 10 years, large size companies have averaged 12% return. Again, fantastic performance over a 10-year period. Medium-sized companies, 9.4. Small-sized companies, 7.2. International small-size companies, 4.8%. Not great. And international large-size companies, 4.3%. So you can tell large-size outperformed last year. They outperformed the last 10 years. They've outperformed the last 5 years. They have been the best performing asset class of that decade. And what I'm talking about in this episode is when people see those returns, they're going to want to change their investment strategy because they see that. They're going to say, hey, why don't we just all go in large size companies? But before we get into that a little bit more, I want to show you where this outperformance is coming from. And it's largely coming from, obviously, large-size companies, but it's coming specifically from the Magnificent Seven. 7 companies that have just done absolutely unbelievable last year, as well as, in the last few 5 to 10 years. And I am talking specifically about Alphabet, which owns Google. They changed their name from Google to Alphabet. Amazon, Apple, Meta, which was Facebook, Microsoft, Nvidia has just been insane, as well as Tesla. And so when we look at the outperformance and where those gains are coming from, a lot of it is coming from those 7 companies that are now called the Magnificent Seven. But it's not just the Magnificent Seven that I want to point out. I also want to point out something about large size growth companies versus large size value companies, because we actually see a big difference in performance from there. And so what does a large size growth company means? It basically means companies that are trying to grow as quickly as possible. They are not paying out dividends. They're not trying to get stable cash flows. They're trying to reinvest as much cash flow into their business versus giving it to shareholders as they can, because they're trying to increase revenue and eventually increase profits over time. Whereas value companies, they have more stable and consistent revenue, cash flow. They probably will pay out some kind of dividend to shareholders because they want to reward the shareholders, and they're not trying to grow as rapidly as possible. And so a value company is a company like a Walmart or Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, your grocery stores. They know when and where, they know when they're going to get increases in cash flow. They can adjust for it. They have more stable lines of revenue as well as income. And so if we look at 2023, growth companies, large size growth companies earned 42.7%, whereas large size value companies only earned 11.5%. Obviously, 11.5 is a fantastic return, but it's not 42.7. And a lot of that 42.7 is, again, coming from the Magnificent Seven of Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, and Tesla. So it's coming from those companies, and they are categorized as a growth company. And then if we look back over the last 10 years of growth versus value, we see large size growth, 14.9%, the best returns on the board, and the large size value companies getting a really solid 8.4%. So if we're looking at, what's the clear winner over the last 10 years, it's not just large size companies, it's large size growth oriented companies. And so that's why we see the tech companies as well as these software companies that are doing so well, because they are growth companies. They're trying to just increase revenue as much as possible. So my point here is that if you have been diversified, as I am with my own money, as my clients are with their own money, if you have been diversified in large size, medium size, small size, and international companies over the last 10 years, you absolutely 100% can't deny it, have missed out on returns that you would have received if you had only been invested in large size growth companies. And so when people see this, when they realize that this has been happening over time, like the last 10 years, it leads them to ask the question, well, why should we still be diversified? We're underperforming by not having more in large cap. And so here's a question from Reddit on the Fidelity Investments subreddit. And the question is, why bother with medium and small size, why bother with medium and small cap funds when the large cap consistently outperforms both of them? And so first of all, I do want to say, if you've been diversified, you've still done well, just not as well as you could have only been in large size companies. Second, I do have to admit that this criticism of diversification is actually true. We did miss out on not being concentrated in only large size companies. Now, I'm not sure who said this first, but there's an adage that goes, diversification means having to say you're sorry. So if diversification means having to say you're sorry, I do need to apologize to the dozens and dozens of people listening to this podcast as well as the YouTube channel, because I do believe in diversification. And let me show you why. Do you, my dear listener, remember what it was like investing in the 2000s? Before we had this large cap outperformance. Let's look at January 2000 until December of 2009. We are going to pull this chart up from a website called Portfolio Visualizer, and it's going to be showing what our performance would have been if we had large size companies in the US, medium size companies in the US, small size companies in the US, as well as an international fund that excludes the US. Over that 10-year period, the annual return of large size companies is a negative 1.303%. Large size companies, negative 1.03%. Medium sized companies, they actually got an annual return of 6.13. US small size companies, 4.36. And then international non-US companies, 2.29. So if you had only been in large size companies in the 2000s, you actually would have lost money over that decade. Whereas if you had been diversified in medium, small size, and international companies, overall you would be up, and your biggest loser would have been large size companies. And then obviously, as I showed you the last decade, if you had been in large size companies from 2010 until basically now, your best performer would have been large size companies. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future because we look at the past and we show different results, different returns for different investments. And so I've shown you so far 2000 to 2009, large cap did the worst. And then I also showed you basically the last 10 years, 2014 till the end of 2023, where large cap did the best. But let's put them kind of together and let's do the last 25 years, 1998 to 2003, and let's see what that 25-year cumulative total return is. 98 to the end of 2023, medium-sized companies, 639% return, small-sized companies, 310% return, and large-sized companies, 278% return. Wow. So, mid-cap has absolutely been crushing it over that 25-year period, even with their relative underperformance to large size companies over the last decade. So whenever you see people insisting that, hey, large size companies are all you don't need to be diversified anymore, just put it into these magnificent 7 companies, you need to realize that these people are making their decisions because of something called a recency bias. The idea that what has ever happened most recently is going to happen into the future. And yes, large size companies have done extremely well last year as well as over the last decade. And it does make you want to hit yourself on the head for quote unquote missing out on those large size returns, even if your overall portfolio has done well, because you would have more money had you timed this perfectly and been in only large size companies over the last decade. But you've got to give yourself a break because you have no idea whether we're going to get large size underperformance like we saw in the 2000s or large size outperformance like we saw over the last 10 years. No one else knows as well. So if you want my advice, stay diversified, large size, medium size, small size, as well as international companies. And that's what we're going to want to do going forward for the next 30 plus years of your retirement. And if you do that, I still think you're going to get really solid returns, and do not hit yourself over the head for quote unquote missing out on something that you have no ability to predict. So that's all I've got for today. I hope it's helpful. I'll see you next time. Bye.